Hello and welcome to the latest edition of The Shindig, a podcast about archaeology brought to you by the Red River Archaeology Group. I'm your host, Tom Horn, and today we've got a really brilliant podcast for you. It's with the Viking Dublin Dogs team.
I've Neolithic and Bronze Age dogs from various caves in Ireland, and then we have these commercial dogs from Viking-Age and Iron Age as well, and medieval times.
They are discussing the amazing work they're doing. They're looking at early medieval and Viking Age dogs, wolves, horses.
You also have to have some sort of like stabling for it if you're of a certain status, because of course Irish early medieval society is so heavily stratified that everybody knows their place in it.
All the things that people think are cool or interested with from time immemorial, they're talking about it, and their amazing project to discover DNA links, to discover trade of these animals, discover movements, discover their use in human settlements, the human-animal interactions with them.
At what point did dogs that were already in Ireland and then dogs that presumably came in from a place like Scandinavia, do they start to breed?
They are currently fundraising to raise money for more radiocarbon dates, and they're wanting to expand the project so it's not only Ireland and Britain, but will include Scandinavia as well. So it's really going to change the way we look at a really important period in terms of these human-animal interactions, and also just the way we look at dogs and wolves and horses, which were so important at the time and even to this day are vital to the way that we live our lives. So enjoy. So hi guys, thanks so much for joining us today from the Viking Dublin Dogs project. But it's kind of more than just dogs as we would certainly understand it today. So perhaps we can just start off by getting a sort of brief introduction to the project and maybe a little bit about the fundraising campaign that you're currently undertaking.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Tom, thanks very much for having us. It's a delight to be on the Shindig, and hopefully the next hour or half hour will go smoothly. But yeah, like the whole project kind of was an interesting one that born out of Twitter, basically. Social media gave it its birth. It started with me posting a tweet on, using a mandible or lower jaw of a very large type dog from Chancery Lane site in Dublin City in Ireland. And it's a Viking Age medieval site on the River Poddle. And it just kind of caught basically some researchers out there, caught their airwaves, and they were interested and started reaching out. And so we just formed the researcher pack with various different areas of expertise covered to make it as multidisciplinary and as integrated as much as possible. So I'm the PI on the project. I'm a part-time research scientist in the School of Archaeology in UCD, and I'm also a commercial zoo archaeologist as well. So it's a kind of a hybrid between the commercial and the academic sectors, so I can see both sides quite well, which is good. And it's been on my mind for a while, a few years anyway, the different types of dogs. I've been collecting dogs from various commercial elements and other research elements I've been working on. So I've Neolithic and Bronze Age dogs from various caves in Ireland, and then we have these commercial dogs from Viking Age and Iron Age as well, and medieval times. But yeah, like what was interesting with the dogs is where we have different commercial sites, there's also the presence of horses, and horses and Vikings and dogs and Viking people go hand in hand, as well as medieval societies. And there was an interesting relationship going with what were those roles, both within the cities, but also in the hinterland or the countryside outside the cities across Ireland. And then this was extended after I named everything Viking Dublin Dogs. More and more sites in Ireland that I was working on cropped up. So it's not just Dublin. So eventually the Dublin will be dropped. The domain name will be changed in the future once it runs its course. But then, of course, there was like dogs and horses, and then dogs and horses in Britain as well. And I'm in negotiations with some Scandinavian ones at the moment. So it has kind of broadened a bit, but it's the human animal, at the heart of it is the human animal relationships and what their roles in these societies were. So like Mary is a historian. She'll introduce herself now shortly, and she specializes in Irish Viking-Age and Medieval societies and so on. And Rena, who's an expert in the archaeology of horses and riding and so on. So and there's other members of the research pack. So it's a huge blend of different research elements as well as skill sets and so on to make, how can we discover the stories of were they wolves, were they dogs, and then the dogs and horses relationships, and then those relationships with people and so on through time. So it's a bit of a mishmash and a bit of a large project, but we should get some really interesting results by the combination of different scientific cutting edge techniques at the end of it. So.
And I mean, you've already outlasted Twitter, so you're.
Yeah, exactly, which is interesting.
But it's really
Mastodon as well.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the thing. I think a lot of us, including in this conversation, know each other through Twitter or various social media things. And I think when you're in the sort of subjects that we're in, I'm a sort of Viking Age archaeologist myself. The sort of more niche ones, that it's really valuable tool for us to reach out and talk to and know other people before you ever meet them. And in the world that we've been in the last few years, it's increasingly difficult to travel, and then the expenses have gone up since then. So I think a project coming out of social media is very much of its time in the best possible way. But we'll come back to the brilliant work you guys do online and on social media, all sort of independently and as a group. But as Ruth alluded to there, I think we'll go around the group and just introduce you guys briefly, and we'll start with Mary, just to have a wee introduction to how you got interested in this area of the topic that we're going to be talking about today, with the dogs and the wolves and the horses.
Okay. Mary Valenti. I teach history at Appalachian State University in North Carolina in the U.S. Interest in dogs is pretty much because of this project. I research, obviously, Viking Age, especially Dublin, Vikings in towns. I've been looking at women's history recently. So this has been so interesting. I mean, one of the things that really struck me is how little's been written about them. Well, we've had scads about cats. I mean, I think, they had a poet with Pungarvan, and so they had some good PR from a few centuries back. But I'm really surprised that, the dogs, obviously, Fergus Kelly and other scholars, but there's very little written specifically on dogs in the early Middle Ages in Ireland. So this is a wide open field. This is great stuff you're doing.
And yeah, I mean, it's a topic that, as you say, it's one of these ones. I think the best topics are that in history and archaeology, the ones you think, why has nobody done this before? And then you'll be doing all your research and saying someone must have done this in the past. But that often the thing with really good ideas like this is that nobody has thought of them. So and I know your work very much from my work in Viking Dublin as well. So it's a privilege to talk to you all today. And to Mary, I can remember referencing your work a lot in my thesis and my book as well. So hopefully,
I love the book, and I'm really excited to finally meet you, other than on social media.
Thank you. And talking about social media, Raina's, we're moving on to horses now, and somebody whom I know entirely through Twitter, I think. Our paths didn't quite cross at Govan, but hopefully you'll be back, because we've got some lovely horses that we'll talk about in the Govan Stones in a minute. But just before I sort of fanboy over the Govan stones and the horses on that, can you tell us a little bit more about your research and your background and how you got into this project?
I am an archaeologist. My special side is horses and laurinary. Laurinary being all the tiny little metal bits that go into bridles and pieces of saddles and God knows what. I'm very much into metal analysis as well. And also, most people would know me from Iron Age more than anything. But Ruth sort of made me an offer I couldn't refuse on this one, saying, oh, would you be interested in looking at the Viking horses? And the thing is, because, of course, so much of the Viking period is at that stage for them, it's still very much on the junction of the Iron Age in many ways, the Scandinavian Iron Age. So they still have an awful lot right through until quite late on. They've got a lot of hangovers of a pagan past, for want of a better word, and how they treat the horse and how they behave with the horse at that stage. And that is something I'm very interested in, as anybody who's had the misfortune of having to read my first book will know that it's something that I'm very, very interested in, because there's parallels with Germanic equitation and Irish equitation. So while I am actually technically doing a postdoc funded by IRC on weaponry and all sorts of lovely things of the Iron Age, I thought, I could sneak in a bit about horses here, and it's a learning curve as well, and I'm learning from Ruth, I'm learning from Mary, I'm learning from all of the team, so it's great.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. The website's brilliant. We'll get all the addresses out to you when we do the promotion for this, and we'll say them at the end as well. But you can go and you can see there's lots of researchers involved in this project. I think it's one of its strengths, and in my opinion, is you've got just this wealth of talent, and you're adding people, not all the time, but you're adding people as and when presumably they approach the project or you approach them. So it's really, I just kept on scrolling. I was doing my research earlier, and I thought, this is a lot of people, but and you recognize lots of the names, and you thought, this is all the talents. And again, this is an advantage we can take out of social media, and the fact is, this point, there's 0.1% of the world that's interested. Still hundreds of millions of people in archaeology, but we can all find each other online. And I think that's to say the brilliant thing about it is you do so much on all your social media panels, and your website's great as well. And we'll talk more about that later. But I think now the listeners are probably going to want to hear more about the wonderful dogs and wolves and horses of this early medieval Viking Age period. And I come to this through the Govan stones, which is a remarkable collection of sort of 9th, 10th, maybe early 11th century carved stones from a Brittonics of an old Welsh-speaking kingdom that was in sort of southwest Scotland, the sort of Strathclyde Valley, the Clyde Valley into Cumbria. And they produced these amazing carved stones. There's the famous hogbacks, but there's also standing crosses and the amazing Govan sarcophagus. And the Govan sarcophagus is notable for being pretty much unique for what it is. It's a huge stone casket, probably from the late 9th century, possibly from a Pictish king who's killed by Vikings. So it ticks all the boxes, but we think he's depicted on the side panel of this, and he's on this magnificent horse. And I think Rena and I sort of first met, as it were, on Twitter, discussing the gait or the way this horse was moving or
I'm actually going to, believe it or not, there's a conference being run in October online. And I'm going to be talking about that and other horses.
Fantastic. Well, it's a good horse, because believe me, Govan Stones has some terrible horses, some horses that are maybe donkeys or not, or some fantastical creatures. But the horse on that's somebody who has seen a horse and can use a chisel. And it's a great horse, and we can maybe talk about this some other time. But it's a hunting scene as well, and this is what brings in the dogs in it. There's a dog, there's a stag, there's this beautiful horse. There's also, I think, a wolf on another panel as well that seems to be crushed by a sort of lamb of God, and it's next to a sort of rather jolly-looking snake that's also getting crushed. So we know animals are really, really important in the early medieval world in a way that we wouldn't really maybe understand now. I mean, they're everywhere in the Gum Stones. There's snakes, there's horses, there's dogs, there's fantastical creatures, there's quadrupeds of all sorts everywhere. And if we're talking about the Viking Age, we often think of things like the Great Army. And the first thing the Great Army do when they go to England is they sort of, it's not borrow is the right word, they ask kindly for some horses, and the East Anglians give them lots of horses. And if we think of the Vikings traveling around, it's not long ships all the time. A lot of the time they're moving on horses, and they're presumably got guard dogs and hunting dogs as well. So they're these horses and wolves and dogs are really sort of venerated high status animals that appear in art, whether that's metalworking or carved stone. So I think I'd like to go and ask you now, just for the readers get an idea of just how important dogs, wolves, and horses were to not only Scandinavian Vikings, but just to sort of early medieval peoples in general.
I haven't seen the stone you're talking about, the sarcophagus. Is there a falcon or other bird on there?
There are no birds on it, but the top panel, the lid essentially is missing. So there aren't birds on that scene at all. But what it looks like is we'll give out this image for the YouTube version of this talk, but it's a stag with what looks like a hunting dog and what is probably this Constantine, this king saint on a horse.
Is Scandinavian stones, several of them depict hunts like that, but they usually have a bird of prey in there as well. And there's at least one of the burials from Copan. It's at least I think it's a cremation burial, so not everything is there, but the excavators were connecting hunting and hunting dogs with falcons, which apparently were used in Scandinavia pretty early. I haven't actually looked into this yet for Ireland, but they seem to be pretty well connected. So it'd be interesting to see if that's something else they brought with them or if that's just different. Bayeux Tapestry is 11th century, so when they show falcons as well, along with it's a different thing. So anyway.
That's interesting because in Chancery Lane, the assemblage at the Viking Age levels, there were bones from golden eagles and goshawks.
And the goshawks you would definitely have as a...
Yeah, and there were females. So the measurements matched out with the females rather than the males. Mm-hmm. So they could have been breeding them as well, but also the females are bigger than the males, so therefore maybe better hunting.
So is this breaking news that it's now going to be dogs, wolves, horses, and birds?
Could be.
Is this the part where I bring up foxes?
There's
a story in one of the Lives of Bridget about a trained fox that a king had that did tricks. Now, it's the same life. It comes with all the caveats and all that, but it's interesting that it's in there. Mm. And the miracle comes when somebody thinks it's a wild fox and kills it, and the king gets very upset. And so Bridget miraculously brings in a wild fox, but it can do all the same tricks, so the king doesn't get mad and punish the man who killed the fox. But yeah, it's a charming story.
Well, that's yeah. I begin. Oh, yeah. We all seem to come back. They're sort of. I imagine just the costs involved in keeping these particular sorts of animals and training them and breeding them. Again, that reinforces, including we'll talk about horses now, Verena. That reinforces their elite status because it's just expensive to keep these and to give them keep them healthy. Is that would that be correct?
Well, I mean, you need a landscape to keep a horse in. You need to have the knowledge for its welfare, and you have to have places. For example, in Old Irish text, it states that there has to be like hobbles. You have to keep your horse in a certain place. You also have to have some sort of like stabling for it if you're of a certain status, because of course Irish early medieval society is so heavily stratified that everybody knows their place in it, and everybody has to keep to the law that their class is supposed to adhere to. So yeah, I mean, you need a landscape, you need the ability to train, you need to have the technology to make what or the wherewithal to buy what you need for it. So yeah, it is an elite statement in many ways.
You also need to be able to feed it in a city urban environment. So do you actually rely on things coming from outside? And then what happens during times of crop failure and famine? And we can discuss what happens to some dogs in the cities.
There's a dog incoming at the moment.
Yeah. So,
and of course, horses, like dogs, had different purposes. So there's herding dogs and guard dogs and cute dogs that we love as pets.
We've got a dog appearing for the listeners on the podcast. So if you're not watching on Twitter, the doggos will appear. It's appearing at the moment.
But horses would have been, for riding and for hunting, as for very, very wealthy people. But there's also plenty of descriptions of what are effectively pack horses.
Yeah.
You have to feed them, but they're not trained the same way. They're not the same association with the elite because they were pack horses, but you still had to be able to feed them.
I mean, that's one of the interesting things, I think, from some of the teeth that we've examined to date, is that not all of them have tooth wear. Obviously, if there's a metal bit in a horse's mouth, you're going to get wear upon teeth. Instead, I have a funny feeling that you're going to be dealing with quite a lot of pack horses, which are used in more like halters, and probably also made of straw. If anybody's at Exarch, I'm going to be presenting a paper on this actually in 2 weeks' time. And I've been busy weaving the bloody straw together to make one, so as I can try it out. But you're dealing with a lower grade, a commercial side of equitation rather than the lord riding out with his falcon and his hounds. So there's one's mercantile and one's...
And the Zooarch evidence backs that up to a certain extent, where you have no evidence of bit wear on the teeth, but also from the measurements of the bones, the long bones, the estimation of withers heights, they're quite a small, as I've discussed this with Rena a good few months ago, if not a year ago, with the Chancery Lane horses, that they're actually coming out as being more or less the same size as the Hobby or the Hobner horse, which was about 11 hands or so, 11, 12.
They say that the Hobby could range anywhere from about 11 hands through to actually as big as 14. The jury is out on that one. It's a bit of my holy grail. I mean, sort of it's Rena Maguire and the quest for the Irish Hobby, and the fact that this is like my Indiana Jones moment, always actually looking for this. And my friend Miriam, she is always looking for the Galloway, which I think is actually probably the same animal, just in 2 different places. There is a missing link, that's the Cushion Doll pony, which looks remarkably like the Eriskay. As you know, the Eriskay is actually quite, it's got quite a lot of longevity of breeding line, and it's still relatively pure, whatever that means. But they've kept it like the Icelandic ponies. And I think that when you're looking at that kind of small animal, you're talking about either reconnaissance, which of course the Hobby was supposed to be brilliant for because it was fast and clever, or else you're dealing with, as Ruth says, pack animals. That's one of the things that we are going to be looking at quite intensely.
And I mean, I could talk about horses all day as well, but now I'm thinking again back to that hunting scene, and unfortunately, the one animal in the hunting scene that's damaged is the sort of head of the dog. So any attempt to sort of guess what type of dog it is, I think it's obviously meant to be a big dog. So I don't know if maybe you can tell me a bit and tell the viewers and the listeners a bit about the sort of human animal relationships with dogs and the different types of dogs that they kept, and how different are they to wolves at this stage, just a little bit, so people can sort of place when we're talking about early medieval dogs what kind of types we're talking about and how big they were, and their characteristics and their relationships with their owners.
I'll deal with the zooarch evidence if Mary takes the types.
I mean, it's interesting. Scandinavia, and I'm just starting to look at this, seems to have a fairly lengthy list of different things that dogs did. But where the line is between what a dog did and what type of dog it is something, obviously, a project like this might help figure out. There were lap dogs. These were pets. These were keep. Both Scandinavia and Britain and Ireland, so that's three, not both, like to talk about the guard dogs. I love the fact that in Old Irish, it's literally called a slaughterhound, the Archu. I mean, that is just fantastic. And the implication is that these are pretty big. And both of those seem to have been imported to Britain right at the end of the Roman era. And that before that, something in the middle where they were herding and hunting dogs, how different would they have been? I mean, this is where I really love this project because, are they already being trained and bred separately? One more for speed and one for, because they would have different needs. Or are they more or less the same dogs? It's a difference in training. And this kind of project can really help figure that out.
Yeah, and I think that's where we sort of think, okay, because we've got the artistic depictions, we've got the descriptions, the literary descriptions that you're talking about there, but we also find them actually what sort of context we're talking. I think I'd like to talk about the zooarch material now. What sort of context are you finding them in? What sort of, I think sort of injuries have they had in life? Have they healed or not? Have they been looked after? I suppose. Have they been cared for? Do they get old? I suppose, or they work to death quite young? That's the kind of question I suppose I'd like to ask. Maybe sort of Ruth.
Well, where do I start? There's so much in that, but I've just dug out a few bones. So for the YouTube viewers, they'll get to see them, but I can give you photographs for the Twitter and stuff. But in terms of sizes, first of all, yes, we have the small kind of boned dog bones. So they're usually the laptop small dogs. So they're generally less than 30 centimeters high at the withers, and some of them go as low as 18 centimeters, so very small. So terrier type or dachshund type-ish thing, who knows? And then we have this kind of medium type, which is generally between 30 and 50 centimeters standing at the shoulder. And then 50 plus is where we have the larger type dogs, estimated at, and they're from the long bones. So we have this is a scapula bone, which is basically the size of my hand. So this is a large type dog. And the Chancery Lane dogs are actually a good mixture of sizes. We've the small lap dogs, we've medium dogs, we've large dogs, and then extra large dogs. Mm-hmm. And whether those extra large ones are indeed purely dog or mixture of wolf hybrids in them remains to be seen. It will come out in the project with the ancient DNA evidence. But what we are finding, like what I've seen on all the dog bones that I've looked at from various sites, there's a mixture of diseases appearing on the bones. So osteoarthritis, which generally happens with wear and tear as the animal ages. We have worn down teeth and cavities in the teeth, but the dog is still alive while this is going on. So again, reaching older age. We have puppy bones on site. So they obviously have male and female breeding animals on site, and evidence of a special bone in male dogs. Male carnivores have this special bone in the penis. It's a penis bone, the baculum. So that's been found as well. And then, some of those younger dog bones have cut marks on them. Now, whether they were skinned for their pelts at various stages, or whether they were eaten during times of famine in the city centres, where they wouldn't have been, exposed to getting in new crops and new food from the outside countryside, where everything is more or less brought in. And then therefore, what do you eat? And if there's a lot of dogs around, you might actually rely on them. But like some of the bones also show broken bones that have healed, quite dramatically broken bones, where I don't have it to hand, but basically you have a humerus, a front leg bone, where you have the shaft coming down and then you have this break in it and it's been healed on the side. So that dog would have been cared for, would have been fed and looked after, and it survived that to actually heal the bone. Now, it would have walked with a limp for the rest of its life, but it just shows you that, and that was a large type dog, so maybe kept because it was useful for a guard dog, or something of that fashion, and still useful in that regard, and therefore cared for, and then shows the human dog companionship as well as the caring element within that society. So there's lots of with the bone measurements, and then we'll be using 3D digitizing of the skulls, the teeth, and the bones themselves, the long bones. We'll be able to track patterns of change through time and male and female differences. And then we might get into a sort of, well, are all the small dogs kind of the same, and all the medium kind of the same? And is there something going on with the extra large or the large dogs? And not only for Ireland we'll be doing this, hopefully we'll do the same level of measurement. We'll have the actual measurements, but this kind of 3D digitizing as well for dogs from York in England, and Westow, Ipswich. Oh, I've forgotten 2 sites, but anyway, they're on the website. But we have comparison between different locations within the urban sites, and as opposed to outside the urban sites, where they the same in the countryside, or where the mainly kind of farm animals, herding dogs and guard dogs, or where they lap dogs, do we find them out in the countryside as well? So we can gain a hell of a lot from the bones, and of course the ancient DNA, the radiocarbon dating, the isotope analysis will all come from the bones and the teeth as well. So,
and that's the amazing scientific stuff. And you can just imagine, the connections that you guys are going to be built with the ancient DNA. Maybe you will see something about trade of animals and that. Yeah. I know some people are doing work on, the movement of animals overseas. And I suppose now it leads on to me to think about, that's the sort of the bones. And I'm thinking now more of the context. So I'd like to ask you guys about, the sort of famous sort of Viking-Age, early medieval burials where people are buried with their dogs and their horses, sometimes more than one horse. Mm-hmm. So I suppose the question really is, we'll start with Mary and Irina. We'll talk about the horses. We'll talk more generally just about the historical and the sort of the context of these sort of sacrificial burials and what that tells us about their importance in life and also in the afterlife. If you just maybe like to tell us a wee bit about that.
I think what I find interesting is the fact, especially with the Scandinavian peoples, is that there's several different layers of sacrifice. You've got obviously the bloodbath, where they want arterial blood everywhere, and that involves dogs and horses and God knows what. And we don't know if that's going on in in Ireland or not. We have no. I don't know anyway. I defer to other people's knowledge whether there's ever been any evidence of that kind of thing found in Ireland. We have. Sorry,
I'd forgotten about it when I was doing the Twitter, but in Cloughamore Cave, where there are so many individuals and they're clearly pagan, clearly Viking Age, a lot of it is cremation, but there are animal bones mixed in there. Right. So we don't know all that. And I have to go back and reread all of it. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things driving around, running errands, thinking, why did I forget about this?
And then, of course, you've got the smaller burials and the fact that you've got, obviously, horses and dogs. And, I've noticed that there was some stuff put up recently about the syndicated care and love. I'm not so sure about that, because you don't tend to chop a dog in two whenever you're about to chuck it into a grave and say, I loved you. And I mean, again, the whole Evan Fadlin thing where they ran the horses into a lather and then chopped them up and flung them into the boat before it went up in flames. And we've got one of those in Scotland, obviously. I was Whithorn, I think it is, where there's a potential of human and animal sacrifice connected with burial ritual. And then, of course, you've got the Isle of Man, which could also be potential. The jury's out about Ireland. We only have one that I know of for certain, and I don't know if any horse bones were ever found with it, because I have no knowledge of it, and that's the one in County Meath, outside Navan. Now, granted, the material goods, the bridle connectors, are very similar to that which you see in Norway. And there's parts of it that might be of a cart of some sort. But as for anything, but nobody has ever said that there were actual bones found with it. Maybe they were cremated. It's an antiquarian find. We have no idea. But I think Mary and myself were talking about the archaeology of emotions as to what these animals would have meant. I think it's probably in a lot of the cases a status symbol, like going on your Lamborghini, being buried with it. But I'm pretty sure it's like everywhere. There's some people who will want that psychopomp, that guardian to take you into the nether regions with you, and with dogs and horses. And of course, they're the two animals that are used from even before Hallstatt to actually act as the creatures that issue you into the new world. And there's so much mythology caught up with that as well. So, I mean, that's very much the sort of stuff that I'm interested in examining in particular. So I would say that from my point of view, looking further afield than just Ireland, you've got a mixture of gruesome potlatch. We're doing this because we can afford to, and people possibly who were genuinely adored their animals. It's like anywhere.
That's it, Mary. Is there anything that you want to add to that in a wider context as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to look at, and clearly people had pets. They named them. We know this. They're affectionate. There's, again, in Kilkenny, only because that's where I've had a chance to go back and look. One of the burials, it wasn't excavated in the round that Dagman's graded, but it's reported in the first huge volume. So I've got a picture. It was a boat burial, and there's a horse, and there's 3 adult humans, and one of the women is seated, and she had. Now this is because it was an older excavation. The only thing they can say is there are smaller bones in her lap that may have been an infant, but may have been a lapdog. And there's a big difference between the two and the implications of what they could mean. And of course, smaller bones would be, of a smaller dog, we're going to find fewer of. But interesting that there is that possibility where the horse was almost certainly sacrificed as a sacrifice. there's a dog's head in there, almost clearly sacrificed. It's on top of a cauldron. But the other one, if it's there, if it's not, it's a woman who died in childbirth or something like that, or she and an infant died of a disease together, that may be a lapdog. So, finding animals in even a single grave could mean different things. And of course, there's other pieces of animals. You've got the whole animals, but you've got the bone combs and, things that are made out of animals that are going to show up in graves as well.
Last thing thinking, I've been very privileged to do some digging at Repton, and the sort of the parts of animals in there, the famous boar's tusk between the legs of the unfortunate gentleman, and there's the sheep's jaw that was next to the sacrificed children, which looks like next to the mass grave as well. So, I mean, to the listeners, like, you don't know too much about the Viking Age and this burial practices. Read about it; it's fascinating, but it can be horrifying, confusing as well.
I'd love to find out if there's, and again, this project has so much to offer. Was there a difference between what we're more likely to find at an urban grave versus a rural site?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that leads me on yet with your great work on Dublin, and we've all got an interest in Dublin and York and these sort of bigger sort of trading sites and towns, and you're talking there about the differences. So perhaps you're more likely to get imported dogs if there is a trading dogs, and horses. That's more likely, obviously, to be at the sort of the trading centres, whether that's a beach market or whether that's a major sort of nodal trading point like a Dublin or York or a Cowpang or a Hedibou, or that. So I suppose then that's making me think, then, if we're talking about this difference, if we're going to let's look at now at maybe the evidence that you might get or be looking at say Dublin and York. Will you be looking at the sort of ancient DNA? That's aDNA for people who are wondering what that means. Might tell you about the importation of animals, because I know there's been research done recently, like Lothman et al. And they're looking at the Great Army and the Heathwood burials, which is a cremation ceremony for people who don't know, who's just down the river from Repton. But they've found bones there from animals, and they can manage to extract DNA from them, and they seem to be imported. So is that something, maybe I say more likely at urban sites, you might be able to sort of look into as part of the research project? And I think Ruth maybe has some thoughts on this.
Yeah, it is on the list. With the ancient DNA, we're collaborating with Pontus Skogland and the Francis Crick Institute. So him and his lab are doing full genomics. So it's the entire sequence of each dog. So it lets us have a deeper dive into these relationships through time and per location. And then coupled with the strontium isotopes, which lets you have insight into origins as well, and traveling and migration, isotopes with carbon and nitrogen, like what they eat and what they drink. Are they eating and drinking the same thing from the same location, or are they, with the imports, they'll have a different signature? So by building up complementary scientific techniques and analysis, we'll be able to actually get a more rounded and fuller picture of what's going on, rather than, say, looking at, mitochondrial DNA and that's it. Like, you only see one part of the story, you don't see all of the story. So with the full genomics, it does take 3 years once they get their samples. We will be able to get quite quickly the gender of each dog, male and female. So that will actually help us with the isotopic analysis as well. So there will be different phases of results coming in, and they'll be written up in different phases. But then at the end, there'll be a few synthesis papers drawing all the data together. So coupled with then the size and shape, morphology differences in the bones and the teeth, we'll be able to then track again changes, like are they adaptations to the sizes to a certain extent outside or inside urban centers or trading, and again linking in trading patterns associated with different sites and within countries, between countries. So it's kind of like one of those things where we're asking questions, but there's going to be more questions coming out of the data that we find and get results on through time. And so the project will build and build and build as it goes. So it's like opening up a can of worms. We know the kind of high level kind of questions and the basically what's on the website, but then after that they'll be drilled down even further, and then linkages between the different lines of evidence and the threads of the results and so on. So
that's great. And I suppose the same question then to Mary and sort of Rena from a historical, or is it easy to import horses? I suspect it's possibly not. So just anything we've got in any of the law codes or anything that was mentioned about moving hunting dogs or dogs or horses around, and then maybe the practicalities of it, if you guys have got anything you'd like to add to what Ruth just said.
I mean, there is a mention of importing horses, but I've always assumed they were kind of smaller pony-sized pack animals from Wales at one stage, kind of before the Viking Age. So there's mentions of that. The dogs had to come from somewhere. Same with cats. So did they come, this really small lap dogs and the really big guard dogs, did they come from Britain after towards the end of the Roman age? Did they come from France? Which is not impossible. They're listed in earlier sources that predate the Viking Age. So it suggests they were there already. But if Vikings brought their own dogs, which is not at all impossible, because obviously they got sheep and everything else off to Iceland. So they got them to Iceland, they could get them to Ireland. Was there a big wave, say, around the time of Canute, when so many other things we know from Scandinavia were kind of a revitalizing of connections with Scandinavia at that point? There's just so many things that hopefully this project will be able to shed some light on.
Well, we do. We do.
Sorry, go on. Yeah,
we do have horses and dogs in Ireland from dogs from the Neolithic and horses from middle late Bronze Age. So after the Ice Age, we did have horses beforehand, but whether they're a continuation on and then interbred with whatever came in or was imported at various stages, should be thrown up in light of this project, coupled with my other project that I work on. So
I mean, judging by the late Iron Age in Ireland horsebits, certainly those that were found at Dromana and other parts across Ireland, you're dealing with animals that are at least cob-sized, anywhere between 14.3 to 15.2 hands. And again, a lot of this has probably been imported in through via Roman Britain, because wherever Romans go, they tend to breed the stock up. They're ideal military horses, 14.2, because you can slip on and off of it very easily. But you've also got other bigger animals that are doing the rounds at that stage. I think the DNA is going to be fascinating of this, because it's going to give us an idea, especially if we're animals like the Irish hobby, the Galloway, the Manx pony, the Cushendall pony, the Achill pony, the Roscommon pony, all of these animals that are now bred out and extinct, that go way back. It's going to give us an idea of exactly when we're starting to see them appearing on the timeline and how far back or not, as the case may be. So it's all to play for.
And you talked about the war ponies there. I'm sure I read or heard somewhere, it's probably wrong. Whenever one starts a question like that, it probably is. But I'd love to be corrected that especially the Great Army, but I don't know many armies at that time, they would tend to ride horses to battle, but then they would get off the horses and
fight.
Is that correct?
That's right. Absolutely. Yep. That's pretty much as well how the Germanic tribes were doing it. And Bella Gallico, that's exactly what Caesar says. That they gallop up to the scene, they hop off, they fight like hell, and then they call a taxi, basically, to get them back. That's pretty much how they roll. And of course, Caesar isn't impressed by the Germanic animals at all, calls them small and ugly. But yeah, that is very much, unlike, the Scandinavians are keeping to that methodology of battle. Because again, if you've spent all that time training up an animal, you don't want it to get bumped off, until you want to have a horse fight or you want to sacrifice it or whatever. As long as it's functional, it's like having a small tank, really, isn't it?
I mean, there's evidence on the continent for, as early as the 9th century by Charlemagne. In fact, probably his grandfather, training war horses, beginning to. There's evidence even going back to Alexander the Great of at least some cavalry units as we would understand them. But because they're fast and they can go around, and they're nimble, so they're very handy in that sense. It's one of the things that kind of smashed up the hoplite, which needed to march as a unit, as a phalanx, is horses could outflank them. But it happens eventually. I mean, by the time 1066, the Bayeux Tapestry shows William the Conqueror's men are all on horseback, and they're fighting against English with their shield walls. Although there are at least some mounted people on both sides. So the amount of dependence on horses for battle. But in Ireland, that seems to come later. Again, by the time the Normans show up, they're on big war horses. It's one of the things that gives them an advantage.
And that's it. I mean, the scope when people talk about the Viking-Age and Medieval period, I think we sometimes forget that we're still talking about hundreds of years. We're the huge amount of developments that happen, particularly in societies that are under stress or in warfare. You see how quickly, tanks and warplanes develop. And I imagine, we shouldn't have this monolithic view of hunting dogs or fighting dogs or horses and horses for riding or horses into battle. These, what the situation is in 800 and the situation in 1100 is going to be, as you're suggesting there, is going to be pretty different. And as someone I think once said, and again I can't quote it, is that 10 years ago in the past is as long as 10 years ago from now, sort of thing. We've got to get that in, and we're talking about really deep, long time here. So I think that's what we should all, as listeners and people who are watching this on YouTube as well, that know that this is a rather grand, epic project, and there's going to be probably more questions than answers by the end of it. But hopefully, you're going to be starting to see trends developing and connections beginning. But this is very much the start of probably an entirely new field, really, of research, is the way that I've understood it. And I think here, what I'd probably like to ask, just to sort of bring it back to the sort of the specific sites and specific archaeology and specific historical sources. What sites can you give myself and the viewers and the listeners, maybe just a couple of highlights in terms of assemblages or sites that you're looking at that you're hoping to maybe compare to each other or contrast? So I don't know if Ruth wants to start, and then Mary and Raina can join in.
Well, I suppose like in Dublin, there's a few different real urban sites around Dublin Castle, and not too far away from Dublin Castle, so on the River Poddle, but also within the city walls. And then we have outside in the hinterland, a good 20 kilometres away. And then we have down up in County Meath, so up outside again, up in the hinterlands, and then straight across to Roscommon, the Ranelagh site, which is a monastic and monastic medieval burial site with lots of humans, but there's lots of dogs too, which I have to find in their boxes that are stored by IAC, one of our main supporters in terms of the commercial sectors. And then we have like the odd dog coming up in County Wicklow and County Kildare, again, countryside, hinterland, and then in Cork City then as well. So that's another urban site. And then we have, I have to view the collections now up in the National Museums of Northern Ireland. They're collaborating with us as well. So they also have wolves. So that should be interesting to get dated as well to see when they're coming up. But they have large dog types as well. And so the scope of the project kind of, it widened a bit to try and get a good storyline basically and to see trends through time. So we're roughly, and there's some earlier outliers and some later outliers, but it's roughly from 700 AD to 1400 AD. So it does encompass a large swatch of time, but it should give us enough to see through changes and the beginnings of maybe trends of dogs being established and horse types being established through time, and to see the imports coming in. So with England, then we have York City itself. So that's another important urban Viking Age site, which is a good comparison to, of course, to Dublin. And then we have outside of that in Ipswich down south and southwest and so on. So West Stowe is the other one, West Stowe. So they have large dogs as well there, but there's also the small dogs. And again, it's like where are they coming from? Are they local? Are they not local? And so on.
Excuse me 1 wee minute.
So that's Mary then next then.
Well, and one of the things that'd be so interesting is at what point did dogs that were already in Ireland and then dogs that presumably came in from a place like Scandinavia, do they start to breed?
Mm.
And because that'll tell us a lot about the humans interacting. So do we very quickly see dogs that are crossbred between the two? Or does that hold up for a while? And then it'll be really fun to find this out. And because there's no way to find this out without doing this testing.
Mm.
You know, the sources aren't going to bother to tell us about it, but it will give us a lot of indication about human interactions over time.
Yeah. And yeah, I think you guys keep on coming back to that we're getting this long period of time in which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a 7-year project. Is that how long we're sort of looking at the moment?
Yeah, it's mainly driven by the genomics that takes so long, and because we have to phase samples going out in batches according to the funding. So the isotopic analysis and the ancient DNA costs are covered by the respective labs. Darren Grock in Durham University and Brian Hayden in University of Brunswick in Canada are doing the stable isotopes, and then Pontius in the Crick Institute in London is doing the ancient DNA. So with the crowdfunder, it was to raise funds towards radiocarbon dating, which is being covered by Chrono up in Belfast. So it's the one element we don't have funding for, and obviously I will be applying for other funding next year to try and bump up the numbers. But again, we'll have kind of a phased kind of time when samples go out, and then my links with Scandinavia as well to broaden the project out of interest to see what's going on. And of course we have the outreach. The outreach is very important in terms of public, social media, but also the secondary school kids we're working with, the secondary schools where we have the kennel packs. So they get to sponsor their own dog and they follow their dog. There's a unique password protected web page on the website for each school. So we've 5 places and 3 of them are taken up already. But they get to follow then their dog that they name and sponsor all the way through. So they get behind the scenes and explanations and Zoom talks and so on, question and answer chats. So it's, inspiring the next generation of archaeologists and scientists to come up and realize that research is just asking questions. That's all it is. It's not some thing in an ivory tower. It's just asking questions and trying to find the answers to those questions. So, but yeah, the outreach element is multi-leveled and multi-layered, I suppose, throughout the project from day one.
Yes, and I'll bring people back. Go to Viking Dublin Dogs website and the social media, and it's a brilliant website. There's lots of information on it. And there's more to be added. So, all the podcasts that you guys have previously done and all the outreach you've done is all sort of listed there, just a click away. So, yeah, definitely get to the website and we'll all give out the information for that at the end. But I suppose, the question you're talking there about questions to ask, I suppose for a bit of fun, you don't have to take this too seriously. So for each of you, again, think of it in terms of this sort of 5-10 years of this project, what question is more important for you to ask, and one that you think you might get into the foothills of, or just a question that you want to ask of the data? So we'll start with Ruth and Mary and then Rena, and so a question that you kind of want to ask just for, because it interests you, because that's kind of why we do it. We're just fascinated by history and archaeology, and within the scope of this project, how you might be able to bring that question to the data that you've got and continue to gather.
Oh God, that's not a hard question at all.
We've gone off script here, people. This is why I'm being naughty.
I suppose as somebody who's had dogs all her life now, not at the moment, but I will in due time be getting more dogs. I find the human dog bond and the caring element quite important, and how that traces through time with different types of societies and different types of living centers, basically, how that relationship changes or it doesn't change through time per location is quite important. And to see then the adaptations in the bones themselves. So from a pure zooarchaeology point of view, do the shapes and sizes change according to roles through time? Are they actually adapted and bred up for certain roles? And are those roles primarily associated with urban centres as opposed to countryside? So so it's that relationship between the hinterland and the urban sites where I'm like going, what's the differences, or if there's any common trends and so on.
All right. Okay. Well, good luck with that one. So, Mary, now it's your turn to ask us
question. Urban and rural, totally. One thing that's intersects a bit with some other research I'm doing. We've got other bits of art history, but specifically, what about things like tapestry and embroidery? Because that's one of the few places where we get work we can almost certainly say a woman did this. And given the way that women are especially associated, for example, with the small lap dogs, is that going to be borne out or not? And what can things like the overhoggle tapestries, which I need to go back and look at, some of the things in Oseberg that seem to have been made locally as opposed to imported, be really interesting to find some of that out. If we can connect women specifically with some of it.
Oh, yeah, no, that sounds, I mean, this is the other thing as well. People should, when they listen to Mary's answer there, just to generally just Google some of these things, these tapestries that you may have seen or may have not seen, or just you need to remind yourself because you've looked at different aspects of them. Go into them again and look for the dogs and look for the horses, and you'll. I mean, some of them are great. We might ask a question just after we get Rena's answer for this about depictions in art, but just for Rena now. What is your then such a slightly fun question that you'd like to begin to get answered in this project?
I think I view the Viking period as being the middle ground between obviously the high medieval period, which we've got lots of documentation for and lots of artifacts for quotation wise. And obviously the end of the Iron Age and early medieval, if you get what I mean. I'm interested in the breeds. Well, they're not breeds at that stage, obviously they're types. I'm interested in imports, exports. Where does Ireland stand in the middle of all this? So I think especially from the DNA and trade and material culture, those are my main interests, I think, as to see where we're going with what breeds were actually left here on Ireland, what were we bringing in, what were we sending out, and how does that affect the animals that we were left with. Obviously, there's a lot of mystery about the Connemara pony, the Kerry bog, etc. But there's, as I just said, there's so many extinct types that are they extinct? That's another question. Are they simply just bred out a bit? So, yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
Again, equally, yeah, absolutely fascinating. You always got me for talking about trade and movements and things, but the fact is that things that we think might be extinct, but they're still kind of amongst us. The way we all find out now, we've got a few percent of Neanderthal DNA in us. I think does anything ever really kind of die out? And I suppose that's a bigger question. But I suppose now, before we just talk about some of the fundraising details, just to finish off. Maybe then I suppose it's again another fun question, but I have actually included this in the notes. Artistic depictions, or so maybe just your favorite one, or to each of you, one that you feel is either accurate or one that you think they're trying to tell us something, almost spiritual or figurative about the horse or the wolf or the dog. So I just want to go around. I don't know if we want to start with Rena just on that one.
I have to confess, after being there last year, you've got several absolutely brilliant carvings in in Govan. And I think the Meagle stones as well, because they are showing pacing animals. And there's a lot of questions about that, obviously, because the Viking ponies were moving at a trot. And that fifth pace, and yet these are Pictish animals. Are these Viking ponies? Are they indigenous? Are they a wee mixture of them all? So I love the naturalism of them. And as the big sarcophagus is absolutely, you're right. It's an absolute brilliant. It's really good.
Or the leg, the head kind of loses it a wee bit, but the legs just the legs are great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And so and now Mary, I don't know if there's either a poem or depiction in stone carving or metalwork. Is there one thing that's really sort of redolent of why you're interested, why we should be interested in the horse or the wolf or the dog?
I mean, there's so many, and the Book of Kells is always glorious, and it's nice because it predates most of the Viking Age. It's very stylized in some places, but at the same time, you've got those very accurate cats. You've got that horse that the monk is riding that is really sort of stepping out. So I'd be curious of Rena about that. I already said tapestries and women's work. I'm really interested in. There's so much. It's clear that the same artist could depict very realistic and very stylized creatures at will. And, the Bayeux Tapestry not only has the main story, but it's got all kinds of beasties, real and imaginary, in those top and bottom margins. There's at least one fight. Well, there's clearly a hunting scene, but there's also, I think it's a bear baiting that's much smaller down in one of the margins. So there's all kinds of interesting bits and pieces. And it's sometimes we can really date these things, which I think helps us look at some of the changes. I mean, they can't depict a hunting scene if people weren't hunting with animals,
But that's so basically for I think you guys are in trouble. You got to add bears to birds, to dogs, to wolves, and horses. So
Only if dogs are involved with the bear baiting, but that's an English depiction. But, they're there.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the sense then that we get. I think that, in the same way that the outdoor worlds is much more part of people's lives, and the weather is much more part of people's lives, then the animals would have been, you're living with them, they're in your house, they're in the other side of your longhouse or whatever. So it's very much a world where so the sights and sounds and smells of animals and the weather and nature are kind of in your face, 24 hours. So, it's brilliant. You guys, they're talking about the art that, it's good that why are there so many animals on all these, especially the Goblin Stones, or snakes everywhere, and you just don't think of it as something that you've ever seen really, particularly in the wild in Britain, and particularly in Ireland, with snakes, for example. But I think that's it. The answers you're giving here, and we'll go on to Ruth now. But her answer for that is that they're in the songs, they're in the poetry, and they're in the art. So I'll go to now Ruth, so we can get on to we can talk about Ruth's answer, and then the fundraiser, and we can finish on that. I'll let you all escape for the evening.
Well, Mary kind of covered mine in the Book of Kells with the art. So and even the birds in the Book of Kells, there are some depictions that are eagle-like and so on. So you have to wonder what the association is, and they do draw what they see. Obviously, it's stylized, but they have to be there. But there's some wonderful depictions in the Book of Kells, in terms of dogs and stuff. So basically, whatever Mary said, I agree with that. So.
And it's great, as a Scot, we can all talk about a Scottish book. But I'll move on. No.
The Book of Kells has so much religious iconography.
Yeah.
Snakes were very much Christian symbol. Obviously, the eagle is a symbol of John the Evangelist. One of the Matthew was the lion, but a lot of times the lion, which they clearly didn't have in Ireland, looked very cat-like. And one of my favorites, in one of the earliest pages, where they're doing the synopsis and the things in the Gospels that you will find the same in across different ones. And they've got all four of the evangelist symbols across the top. So you've got Matthew, who's an angel, and Mark, who's the winged lion. But the lion is leaning over and licking Mark in the face, who is rolling his eyes and trying to lean away from it. And that's people who knew cats better than they knew lions. But I love that even with the, what are clearly meant to be very religious iconography, you get those little bits of humor and, why we love cats.
Indeed, and why we love cats, dogs, and horses. They're just... I was just a friend has a horse, and I was just managing to feed a horse just the other week, and they're such magnificent large animals, and so they're impressive now. And I know I've seen plenty of horses, but you can imagine if you've not seen that many horses, or an army appears across the horizon on a lot of horses with snarling slaughter hounds, or as we call them, you're going to be pretty scared by these. But anyway, I could talk about that. I'm sure you could talk about it forever. Luke will eventually just press stop. So I'd like you just now to just tell us about how we can help you achieve all these wonderful aims and answer some of these questions with your fundraiser.
I suppose spreading the word as much as possible. It's all about spreading the word and spreading the interest, and the more backers we have, the more we can do. And if that's at over phased different times, then that's fine. We are beginning to I'm beginning to target commercial businesses now from now on, for the next month and a half, to try and bump up the phase 1, we're going into phase 2 now. And then next year I'll apply for some, traditional funding avenues, writing grant proposals and so on. But I think the reason I went with the crowd crowdfunder was to, I suppose, capture the imagination of people and involve them directly with the project. There's many ways of following along and getting involved, and also because of, everybody loves dogs. It's a dog-human story, and then everybody loves horses, so it's a dog-human-horse story, and now some birds as well. And but yeah, it's all about, I suppose, the outreach and trying to get people involved in cutting-edge scientific and archaeological research, and if we get so far, we get so far, and then we can try again different avenues and so on. But it's about spreading the word for the crowdfunder at the moment for phase 1, and see where we go with that.
And for that, people can just flat out, they can just do a simple donation, or they can buy some amazing merchandise which people can find on your webpage.
We do have a buy me a coffee thing on the website where you can do a direct donation and not get anything back. But all donations, all backers will be named on the backers site, on the backers webpage. But there's various, from t-shirts to mugs, which I got my coffee mug. It's a nice size. It fills 2 French presses in there, so it's a good size coffee mug. That arrived this morning for me. But yeah, there's hoodies as well. I got my hoodie for wintertime, working at the desk over all these bones, dogs' bones and horse bones. But yeah, there's so many different things there that, it goes from, 10, 12 quid upwards, to exclusive, Zoom talks and previews of results and so on and so forth. So there's for all ages, young and old, and everybody who loves dogs. So
yeah, I'd recommend everybody gets on there, checks it out, for even as the present for something later in the year. You can buy it now, and you've done a good deed. You've helped pay for radiocarbon dates that will help answer some of these amazing questions that we've been talking about today. And it's just, you get a cool thing as well. I've seen people taking photographs of their t-shirts and various things, and it looks very high quality, and it's a really cool design as well, as you can see on the mug and elsewhere. So definitely I commend you to this project, and in terms of just reading more about it, and if you can, giving some money towards it, because it's good people doing really cool work, and you can become a part of it. So I'm very much aware. Sorry, yes, I'll let you.
And I'd like to formally thank our sponsors so far. So all the backers are there on the backer page, individual names, but also we've had several companies and government organisations. So Dublin City Council, National Monument Service, the Apple Farm down in Tipperary. So we're accepting donations from all sorts, and then from the commercial archaeological sector, we've IAC Archaeology, and also thank you to Red River Archaeology for their donation. But also, thank you for having us on the podcast, which is great to actually reach different audiences and get the messages across, and just the interest to follow along. So we'll be posting what we call bite-sized treats or blog posts. So that goes out generally weekly. But they might, it'll time with when we're getting results. So there'll be certain things given out before publication and so on, just to bring people along with the story and the work and so on and so forth. So follow along on the website is the best thing, and the social media.
Fantastic. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Raina. I've had a great time, and I know that our listeners and our viewers are going to have a great time. As I say, get to the website. Even if you don't have the money to donate, just find out more about the project, and share the podcast, and share follow them on social media and share their posts. That's helping as well. So see, they're all lovely people, and they're all they'll answer questions, I'm sure, if you ask them on social media and things like that as well. So please just become part of this project by helping out. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much. Thank you.
Well,
I think we said in the intro that would be amazing, and it was. I know everyone's been who was part of that session was saying how much fun it was. It was just like chatting about archaeology around the coffee table sort of thing, and that's what it felt like. I forgot, as I tend to do in these things, that we were recording a podcast, and I was just chatting with pals. Did that come across to you as Ace producer?
Absolutely.
Luke?
You could see that you were like a kid in a candy shop. Your little eyes were lighting up at the talk of Vikings and everything. It was great. But it is true. It was, for me, it was one of the more fascinating podcasts that we've done. It's a great cause. It's really interesting. It's, from my, I suppose, point of view, it's interesting to see how this kind of outreach can get built, and that from a tweet, this whole project evolves. Something like that is incredible for me to see from, obviously, a digital marketing background. It's great to see those kinds of things happening. But it's really good. I really think our listeners and our viewers are going to enjoy this one as much as we did in making it, because it was absolutely incredible to hear them talk. And hear you talk.
Yeah, well, yeah. I was gonna add that as a note there. No, but I think that was it. It was just. I think what we're trying to do with this is, we're working with projects, we're working with charities, we're working commercial, non-commercial. We don't see commercial people as rivals. We just see we're all doing it because we all love archaeology, and we're trying to get that feeling across as much as the information in these podcasts. So if we can help out a project like this, especially with their amazing fundraising campaigns, so it's, you can give money, as I say, or you can buy this really cool merchandise as well. Their website will provide a link. Just search for Viking Dublin Dogs, and you'll find their social media, and you'll find their website, and you'll be able to donate on that. So, I think I will be buying something from the merchandise because it says Vikings on it and it looks cool. But I just think it's something that you feel really proud about if you're doing the shindig here, that you're actually helping people on a day-to-day basis with their archaeological projects. I'll just leave it to Luke to end it off, because Luke always remembers all the technical things that I forget to say.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you are enjoying these, please let us know. Hit us up on Twitter, hit us up on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. Leave us a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. This is basically a podcast to get stories like this out there. If you have any story ideas or any people you'd like to see interviewed, why not let us know? Drop us a DM, drop us a comment. We're always open to suggestions and always open to ideas. If you did like the podcast and you're new here, hit subscribe, hit follow, share it to a friend. Let us reach a wider audience, because this is about outreach. This is about getting stories out there, as I said. So why not do that? Hit subscribe, hit follow, leave us a review. This has been The Shindig. My name is Luke Barry.
And my name is Tom Horn. And we'll hopefully see you soon.